Hi, I'm Jim Shaw, publisher of the Lexington Times and chairman of the board of LexMedia. I'm here with another segment of Coffee with the Candidates, and as I've said in some of the other segments, I'm so pleased that we're able to have so many good candidates join us for these discussions. Lexington is indeed fortunate to have so many wonderful people willing to stand up and serve in public office. We've got quite a list of candidates this year, and I'm pleased and proud to introduce you right now to Sarah Carter, who is running at this point unopposed for a 2-year seat. So a lot of pressure off of you at this point. So we can have a great conversation, and I think people will enjoy it. The concept here is for us to sort of talk a little bit and give people an idea of where you stand on some of the issues, but more or less an opportunity to get to know you as a person too, and that's why I like this forum, this concept. Before we start, I want to let people know that, like me, you're a proud Lexington native. Lexington High School class of 1994. So you just had a reunion last year. We
did. It was really great. We were able to, it was over Thanksgiving weekend, like is the tradition around here. Our graduating class was about 350, and we had over 100 people at our reunion.
Oh, great.
Which was phenomenal. And then the next day, we did a brunch where people could bring their kids and really get to know each other. It was a lot of fun.
That's great. Well, I just had one last year for my 45th. So, I mean, I'm getting up there.
Yeah.
I was class of 79, so.
Okay.
Yeah. But you moved out, you came back after you got married, you and your husband settled back here.
Correct.
You've got 3 children in the public schools, so this is an issue near and dear to you, being a part and being a voice in the process. Like most parents, you want to make sure your kids are being well taken care of, and you want to be that kind of a representative. You want to represent from that perspective, which I admire you for. You've had a lot of volunteerism in the school community. You've been PTO co-president at Clark, and you've been in leadership positions in the elementary schools and at the high school in the PTO. Active with the Lexington Education Foundation, Special Education Parents Advisory Council. And I know that's an acronym. What do they call it?
CPAC.
CPAC. Okay, so, and that, I know they play an important role in the formation of a lot of policy in Lexington, so thank you for that. You were a former teacher for middle school and high school, and you taught social studies, which is very exciting. My favorite topic. I'm a history buff, so.
It's so much fun.
You can't grow up in Lexington and not at least have a natural inclination for history.
Exactly.
And then you got your master's degree and became a school librarian. So you seem to have quite an interesting experience, or interesting background. And it says, I'm looking at my notes from basic, our pre-interview discussion. You're talking about dedicated most of your adult life to professional and volunteer work to ensure the success of public education. That's a big statement. Public education is obviously something that's been very important, as not only by your own words, and you've made it clear, but obviously through your activities. And I'm sure it ties to your children and all that, but I'm sure you have a passion for it. So let's talk a little bit about that. Tell me a little bit, why is this so important to you?
For most people, you can point to education as really the balancing factor in our society. And ideally, we are providing a competent, strong foundation for students that as they grow up and become adults, they can be strong citizens. They have an understanding of how the government works. They have an understanding of math, science, social studies, all of these topics, and you need education to really lay the foundation for that. So I think it's really important to recognize how much education and making sure that we're providing what our students need is reflected in our larger society.
Right. Well, I think I agree with that, and you obviously have a passion for it, but you also believe that we need to stop and check what we're doing from time to time. So we make sure that the policies that we're instituting are truly making a difference. You had talked a little bit about benchmarks and making sure that we're able to sort of stop and assess and readjust if necessary.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that.
I've been really kind of paying attention to what the school committee has been doing the last 2 or 3 years. When you have really young kids, sometimes there's so much going on, you can't really put the time and energy in.
Right.
But over the last few years, I've been really tuned in and paying attention. And I've been looking at the policies they've instituted, and I say, well, are they successful? Are they working? Are they doing what they want? 2 examples I can think of off the top of my head. One is the Honors for All at for English at the high school. They instituted that at the fall of 2023. I remember hearing a big presentation about it with CPAC, and I thought, this is really interesting. I'm curious how it's actually going to work out.
Right.
And we haven't heard anything about it yet.
Right.
It's been 1.5 years now. I'd love some information. I'd love some data. I'd love an idea from both the administration, from teachers, from students, and from parents of what they think this is doing. I've heard anecdotally from people, but I don't want to make policy decisions based on anecdotal evidence. I'd love to know how this is going. And I think that many other parents would also be curious to see if this is this successful or not. And I think we need to, when we institute policies, put in benchmarks. Another good example is about 1 year ago, last February, 2024, we instituted a new program related to literacy at the elementary school. And again, how is it going? It's been 1 year. What are we seeing? Is this the right program for our students? Are we making success? We're gathering data. At this point, we should be able to start look at the data and see what's going on. But if you don't build in those benchmarks of saying, hey, in 1 year, we'd like a report. Can we add that to the agenda? Or 9 months from now, we'd like to know what's going on. Can we add that to the agenda? You're never going to have it. It's very much the idea of you can make change, but anybody in business knows. With any project you start, you want to build in a set where you go back and review what you did and see if it works.
Right.
The comment I've made is, if any teacher taught something and didn't go back and check and see if the students did well with it, understood it, they would get rightly dinged by their principal. Why are we letting the administration and the school committee not go back and check and see if policies are working?
Right. Some of those policies, do you agree with them? Like the literacy program, are you talking about phonics? To some, yeah, because I know that they had gotten away from that for a while and then they sort of brought it back. Is that?
So we're in the midst of really looking at a new curriculum. So what they'd been doing before, they're not doing anymore. They're doing kind of a in-between program right now, and then in the process of coming out with a new curriculum and deciding what that new curriculum is. But there have been some policies additions. There's more evaluation going on, M-Class and DIBELS, which are the names of 2 tests. I don't want to get too technical. But these are now given at the elementary level to every student. And if a student is identified as needing support, the parents are notified, and then that process is started. Additionally, there's a program for testing at the middle schools they've started called the STAR test, where those have now been implemented about 1 year. And again, if a student is identified as having problems, then reaching out to parents and beginning a process of helping them get back to the grade level they need to be. I love this idea. I love that we're trying new things. I love that we are letting teachers be innovative and come up with new ideas. I love that as the administration we're saying, what we did before isn't working. But we can't just say, well, it's a new idea, of course it's going to work. Let's make sure what we're doing is actually working.
We've got to test it. No, not test it, but we have to ensure that it is doing what we set out for it to do. Yeah.
Exactly.
Good. We talked a little bit about technology use. It's a different time from when you and I were in school, and whether we were in elementary school or even at Lexington High School. I think cell phones were pretty much coming around. I don't know if they were the norm when you were in high school, but when I was in high school, we didn't have cable television, never mind telephones. 94 was, that's the cusp, but that was kind of
Right.
like when it was starting to come around. I don't think kids at high school had cell phones.
No. We weren't even really,
Yeah.
pagers weren't around that much then.
Right.
There were a few people who had like car phones, but
Right.
that was, I tell my kids, I don't have your number memorized, but I can tell you the names of my friends from the 80s. I still have their phone numbers memorized.
Right.
Some of their parents are still in town, still in those houses, and I
Right.
know their phone numbers.
Right.
But I don't know my children's cell phone numbers off the top
In
of
the
my
case
head.
of an emergency, that's amazing. Though. But it's absolutely right. I know my wife's and I know my son's, but beyond that, all bets are off.
Yeah, so it was a different world.
Yeah.
And so much has changed in 30 years with technology. That's the reality. And our children are included in that. And our children are surrounded by technology and how we use it. And it can be a phenomenal tool, and I'm not saying get rid of it, but what I'm saying is when we use it and when we use it in schools, let's make sure we're making conscious choices about it. And let's make sure we're making conscious choices about what the rules are related to technology around our school. I've had parents talk to me and say, the kids at recess at elementary school, one of the kids pulls out a cell phone and they all gather around, or you have 2 or 3 kids with smartwatches.
That's the thing that gets me, smartwatches. And, and I kind of smiled when you brought it up when we were talking before this interview. And I don't mean to any disrespect, but the whole idea of smartwatches on kids in middle school or wherever, it's just,
I mean, it's a very challenging conversation, and I'm
Yeah.
not trying to take away from parents. So smartwatches,
Yeah,
I know
of course.
many late elementary like it because it is a location device.
Okay.
So your kid says,
See, I
I'm
have to be
hopping on my
educated
bike.
too. What are the upsides of this?
My
You know,
kid,
I
your
don't
kid
really
hops
think
on
of
their
that.
bike. I'm gonna go ride over to my friend's house.
Right.
You then know where your child's going, and I
Right.
really, from a parent's point of view, I can see that. I also
certainly
have
can.
some very good friends whose children had severe allergies, and they would say things like, "Look, I'm dropping you off for soccer practice. I don't want to have to rely on making sure the coach's phone is there and not sitting in his car.
Right.
I'm going to make sure you have a cell phone." So I think there are sometimes some very honest, real reasons
Right.
why children have these technologies. And you can't just say across
Right.
the board, nope, never allowed to have it, not going to be here, let's get rid of it. But we also need to make sure that the rules are fair and honest and reflect that. And I think the school committee is really starting these conversations, and I would like to keep pushing them and continue to have them.
Right. I was reading something, the Attorney General, Andrea Cabral, I think her name is putting out this effort to ban cell phones in schools. I personally, I have a lot of respect for it. It's a bit of an overreach for the Attorney General, if you're asking me. Be in the business of being the primary law enforcement person in Massachusetts, and let the other folks who are close to it make those types of decisions. But I think you have to take it on a town by town basis. Is it a real distraction? Are kids not learning as a result of it? And you've got to be able to look at it from a perspective of being up close.
Exactly. And
so-
I think, again, this is a conversation. I don't think school committee can just come in and say, here's the rules,
Right.
we're never talking about it, it's done, books closed. I think it's a conversation of having parents come in, having parents share perspective, and then having parents understand where the rules we're making are coming from.
Well, that's good. And I do think the process has to respect the interests of the parents, too. I mean, when you think about it, the parents obviously have a vested interest in their children. They care about their kids, and they want to know that when they go off to school, number one, they're safe. Number two, they're going to get the education that we purport to give them. And we're well known in Lexington for our great education, our public schools. I'd like to tell people, Lexington is among the very top always, and Massachusetts is at the very top. So we're kind of leading the way nationwide. We're one of the most highly educated communities in the entire country. I'm sure that has a lot to do with our proximity to MIT and Harvard and the colleges where a lot of our residents work. So as a result, we have a lot of PhDs in this town. And we expect certain things from our public schools, and I think it's important that we foster that, and that the parents are part of the process. Some parents feel like they're being left out of the process. That they're not being heard. And it's not an indictment of the school committee. It's not an indictment of the superintendent. The superintendent has a very difficult job. There's no question. But parents have to feel, when they're looking out for their children's best interest, that they're being heard. Would you agree?
I agree with you. I think there's two ideas here that I've heard of and I think about.
Yeah.
So one is opportunities for the public to interact with the school committee. Right now the school committee have public hearings where parents can come in and during community speak time, or anybody in the community can come in during community speak and share an idea with the school committee. The problem is school committee doesn't respond. They sit there and they're quiet, and oftentimes that's appropriate. You're reading a policy, you're commenting on things. That makes sense. You don't want to have an 8-hour meeting where there's an interaction and response. But I would love to see school committee members find more times where they can interact with the town more, where you could actually have a conversation.
Or at least nod.
Or at least nod, exactly. One of the things I'm going to steal from the select board is the idea of office hours, where on a somewhat regular basis, I make myself available for parents or anybody in the community who wants to come and ask a question, come and talk to me. And it's an interactive experience where I'm not going to sit there and just hear what you have to say, take a note, and then move on to the next person. But it'll be an opportunity to actually interact.
Right.
The other thing related to parents and communication is most everyone I know who's been through the public school system with their children for years and years and years. I've been now for 13 years because I have a senior in high school, and I'll have another 6 years after this, is sometimes there's something that's happened to either you or your child that you view as somewhat traumatic.
Right.
And the challenging things for many parents is not necessarily the event that happened, but the response from the administration, from the school. For many parents I know, the response seems oftentimes very adversarial, and oftentimes just trying to get you to be quiet and move on and not keep talking about it.
Right.
And I would love to see the administration work with some of their principals and assistant principals and make sure that they are having a consistent policy and maybe some training on more of a collaborative approach to problem solving. Which I think sometimes, again, that you don't feel like you're being heard when you come in and say, look, this happened to my child, I'm upset, can we talk about it?
Right.
And when you're told, oh, I need to look into it, oh, no, it's fine, be quiet, sit down, it doesn't feel collaborative, it doesn't feel like you're being heard.
Right. Well, I agree that can happen. And I absolutely agree that people and parents feel disenfranchised when they feel like they're not being heard. In a community like Lexington, we need to be heard from as parents. Fortunately for me, I didn't have to. I have one son, and I didn't have to deal with a lot of that. He was active in the school community for the most part. He was an elected president of his class, and so he was engaged, and he had great relationships with all of his teachers, so he didn't fall through the cracks and all of that. But oftentimes kids can, and sometimes it goes, you have some parents, a lot of parents engaged, some parents not quite engaged. Kids can fall through the cracks sometimes.
Exactly.
And I think we need to make sure that there's some safeguards in place for that. Would you agree? I mean, because we have the kids who are high academic achievers. We have kids on on ed plans that are getting a lot of attention. And then there are kids in the middle, not necessarily athletes or whatever, but they, if they don't make their presence known, sometimes they're just lost.
Yeah, I mean, so I have a senior in high school, and she is amazing, she is phenomenal, she is an incredible artist, she writes poetry, she draws pictures. Academics are not her strong suit. And she's found things that she loves and she's really passionate about. She's going to be going to Framingham State in the fall to study American Sign Language, and she is so excited about this, and she knows she's going to be really successful and happy doing this. But she has struggled sometimes with feeling like she's not good enough because she's not getting the A's, and she's struggled sometimes to get into, finding the right fit for classes and teachers and feeling like she is not necessarily being seen.
Right.
So again, I think that's something that parents see. And I'll be honest, I don't necessarily have an answer for you. I think what we need to do, this is probably comes down to budgets from the school committee point of view at some point, of making sure that we are providing for staffing to support with counseling, additionally funding extracurricular activity stipends to ensure that we have enough teachers to provide activities for enough students.
Right. You know, kids in the younger, like in the middle school or the elementary schools, they're less vulnerable because of the way that the teaching model is set up. But when you get to the high school, it's a little different because you're far more independent. You're not running around with
A cohort.
yeah, you know, or even a bunch of kids going to the same classes on the same track, if you will, or
Right.
whatever the cluster, I guess they used to call it.
Yeah.
But you know, and some kids, you know, I worry. Like I said to somebody early in one of the early discussions, the youth counseling connection is an important program. I know it's near and dear to my wife, and you know, a lot of young kids in the high school, you know, they see themselves as different, and they get, you know, despondent sometimes because they don't know how to express themselves. They feel like they can't. They feel like if they do certain things, like come out, you know, if in struggling with the orientation or what have you, their own identities, and rather than deal with it outright, they end up getting, you know, kind of lost in the system. And organizations like YCC helps kids deal with issues of suicide ideation and other things, and it's so important. But we need that safety net. It's so hugely important.
I think there are some really phenomenal things the schools have been doing. So I know at Clark Middle School, one of the things they've done is they're really pushing the ideas of a trusted adult, which sounds really simple, but it's the idea of helping kids identify an adult that they feel a connection with, that they feel trust with. So that when
I haven't heard of it. This is wonderful.
So when they are stressed out and when something bad is going on, they've already had the time and energy to say, who can I go and talk to about this?
Right.
And I think that's a phenomenal program. And I think that Dane Dupre, the principal at Clark, has been doing a phenomenal job of building up those networks for kids to have the support that they need. So I really want to shout out and give him connection there. And I think from the school committee point of view, making sure that we're giving opportunity for administrators to talk to each other and share ideas that are working so that the principal at Diamond can say, hey, this worked at Clark, maybe we should try this. But if they never have time to talk and interact, how are they going to know?
Right. Well, you're right. And a lot of the programs, if they're working in one place, they should work at the other. Professional development is an important part, and I know that's a lot of the mission of LEF. LEF was actually created to help support professional development.
Yes.
And you know, it's important that if we're going to develop programs like this one at Clark that you talk about, that we, you know, that we share it so that it's successful throughout the entire community.
Exactly.
But then it goes back to your original point about benchmarks. Does it work? Is it working? Is it, you know, can we measure, we do have a matrix to make sure that it works. Because at the end of the day, if it all works hand in hand, if, you know, if we're doing one great thing over here and then replicate it, make it work well over here, and then we bring it to LEF saying, this has worked wonderful here. Why don't we create, you know, maybe we can work hand in hand with LEF to do something over here.
Exactly. We can set up a summer workshop where the administrators all come. We maybe bring in people from counseling to help educate on this. And this is a professional development that we have for everybody to expand. And then other principals where this works, they can model this as well.
There have been a lot of parents that have served on the school committee, but it sounds like that, you know, you want to be you're just not running because you're interested in your own children's welfare. You're interested in the welfare of all children.
Exactly.
In Lexington, but you come from the perspective of having 3 children in the school system.
I do, yeah.
That's an important perspective.
My kid, I'm right in the thick of it.
Right.
I'm getting up in the morning and looking on my phone to see what day it is. So if my kid knows if they need to bring their gym shoes or not. You know, I'm recognizing how challenging it is, looking at the calendar saying, oh my goodness, it's another day off in January. how are we going to make this work with our family? Luckily, I'm old. My kids are old enough now that I can leave them at home for periods of time. But gosh, I remember with kindergarten and first grade and second grade, where you're like, wow, we had a lot of days off. How is this really working?
Right.
And I feel like my experience as a former teacher gives me perspective of what the teachers are also facing as well.
Right.
And I have an understanding of how systems work and how public schools work, so that if I'm trying to come up with an idea, I'm trying to fit it into how our system works. So for example, I say, if this program is working at Clark, we'd love to see if it could work at Diamond. Let's make sure we're setting up times where the principals have the opportunity to share ideas that are working. Let's build that into our budget. Let's build that into our calendar.
Right. It's a wonderful idea. It makes all the sense in the world. We've got a few more minutes left, and I don't want to end without talking a little bit about. There were sort of three issues that I wanted to touch on. We don't have to spend a lot of time on them, but first of all, DEI. The superintendent came out the other day, and we published a letter that she put out, sort of recommitting herself to the concept of DEI. And how do you feel about that? Do you think that the schools really need to double down on this, given the conversation in Washington?
Yes, I think we totally have to. If I was on school committee, I would have signed that letter, period. But you look at the town of Lexington, and I think something like a third of the adults in this community were born outside of the U.S. We are such a diverse community. We have people from so many different backgrounds, so many different religions, so many different, it's so diverse. And we need to recognize in the schools that students see it, it exists, and we need to make sure that it is part of how we approach teaching. What does that mean? It is so easy to have biases. It's so easy to have materials that we're presenting or ways that we talk about things that have a biased tone. And we need to recognize that bias exists, and we need to ensure that we are working to decrease bias as much as we can. We need to teach children about these ideas, teach them, give them the language to talk about it in an effective way, and that starts at a very young age. Because if you don't start at a young age, then the message is that these are topics that are taboo and we shouldn't talk about.
Right. We want to encourage kids to speak up and help them find the words to express themselves.
Exactly, and that's oftentimes the early serious talks curriculum that were such an issue a couple of years ago, where it's really about giving kids the language to talk about these things. Let's make it so it's not taboo to talk about skin tone with your friends. Let's make it so it's not taboo to talk about my family looks different from yours. I don't have a dad in my house, or my grandmother lives with me, and so I consider her a caregiver as well because she's so important to me. And just giving kids the language and the ability to note differences and accept them and encourage those, recognize that every family is different. Everybody's experience is a little bit different.
Right. Well, great. Well, I'm glad to hear that. That was well said, by the way.
Thank you.
Let's touch a little bit on the high school. It's a hot button issue. I know people in the school committee are not necessarily sitting in the middle of it because it's a school building committee that's dealing with all of this at this moment. But eventually it's going to come back to the school committee. The process, are you satisfied with the process so far? I mean, it's boiled down now. They've gone through the process. They've had public input. They've had lots and long conversations about, and they've come down to this concept called Bloom, which has already been sent to the school building
Mass School Building Committee.
Mass School Building Assistance
MSBA.
Commission? Yeah.
Mass School Building Association.
Association or assistance?
I'm not
commission.
sure. I thought it was association.
It might, it could be association. You're probably right. But it's there, and so it's like there's some people are saying, well, we hope there's still time to be heard on this. But I'm feeling like that ship, that may have left the port.
So right now they're in the design phase.
Right.
So what got decided last November was where this large building is going to be put. and
Excuse me.
what's the general size and shape of it. And right now they're well in the midst of the design phase. There's so many decisions that haven't been made around this. And they are reaching out to many different communities within Lexington to hear about it. I know that the special ed community is being talked to, families of kids on sports teams, all sorts of different groups have the ability to meet with and give input on this. And its decisions are not going to be made for at least another 6 months when they're going to be submitting the designs. So there is still time to give influence. But back to the high school plan. I support Bloom, and I think it's the way to go. Why do I do that? Any plan that we support needs to look at 3 things. Needs to look at security, because the current high school is a porous campus that is not very secure.
Right. I'll give you that. I actually enjoyed we were living at a different time though, but I love that California concept. Getting out of class and walking
students even today
to D House from the science building. Fresh air.
Students today even still agree that they love the ability to go outside.
Yeah.
And the plan has a very large interior courtyard that students will have access to throughout the day. It will just be an enclosed courtyard for security issues.
Gotcha.
Failing infrastructure. The building is 75 years old. It was built to be for 50 years. It's reached the end of its life.
Right.
We need to address that. And then finally, space. We have way more students than the high school was built for. So any plan we look at has to address all 3 of those. Of the plans that got put forward that address all 3 of those, Bloom is the least expensive, done in the least amount of time, the least disruptive to the students who are still going to school there.
Right.
And I basically say, if you can give me a better plan that meets all the things we need, but is cheaper, faster, or least disruptive, I'm open to it. I'm not absolutely in love with Bloom. I think there could be better plans, but nobody else has really come up with it yet.
Right.
And the fact is, at this point, we decisions need to get made. Do you know what I mean?
Well, time is money. I keep
Time is
saying
money.
that. I've had that conversation with so many people in this process for these discussions. Time is money, and we can't keep kicking the can down the road.
We did that back in 2000 when we didn't
I mean, I
redo the high
understand
school
the
then.
arguments people are saying about saving the high school football field. I watched a lot of games on that football field, and my family played on that football field, and I even played a little bit on that football field. If we could find a plan that could save it, that made sense, but at least there was some give and take. Like, for instance, Center 1 is now going to be saved, the ball field there.
That has the lights, yeah.
But I still honestly hope that there's an opportunity for those folks who are making the argument for the field to be heard. Although I have a feeling that ship has sailed.
Yeah.
But I agree with you, but based on those 3 metrics that you talk about, and we talk about the number of students, we have the MBTA. Okay, we're talking about introducing 1,100 new units of housing.
Right.
That's obviously going to generate a higher student population. And it's not all those students are not all going to the high school. We know that.
Exactly.
But are we taking into account, like we're going through this process now, and we're planning for a school that'll accommodate 10 fewer students than we have now.
That's true.
What do we do? Are we short-sighting this, or?
So ideally, we're making a 75-year building. The last high school was about 75 years. We'd love for this high school to last 75, 100 years.
Yeah.
There's no way we can correctly predict student enrollment for that time period. At some point, you need to say, we're going to put our stick in the ground, and we're going to build based on the information we have right now. Why are we doing now? Because the state's willing to give us $100 million.
Right. That's a big deal.
Why did we pick 2,400? Because that's how big the group that's giving us $100 million is saying we should build it for. When you look at
You're
enrollment,
the first one to say that, by the way. That makes a lot of sense to me, but you're the first one who said that's what the school building.
the Mass School Building Committee said this is they initially said 2,100. We argued we should be 27.
Yeah.
We got to the middle of 2,400. That's
I've been
why that
paying a lot
number
of
is.
attention to these issues, and I haven't heard that. And and I like to think that I try to stay informed, but
It's
that's
so
important.
hard.
I didn't know that.
It's so hard. Yeah, they said this. They're giving us $100 million. When somebody's willing to give you $100 million, they get to make some decisions that you might not always want to agree with.
Right.
That's true for anything across the board. So Paired with that, right now, our largest cohort is at the high school. You look at the numbers, and in all likelihood, this is going to be the height of enrollments. Again, I have a senior in high school. Her graduating class at Bowman had 115 kids in it. Last year, my 6th grader, their graduating class at Harrington had something like 70. The elementary levels, there's just not as many kids there. So as we continue to move through,
Right.
our enrollment is going to get smaller. MBTA, we're going to be getting kids in from there. Do we know how many? Of course not. Nobody has a magic ball.
Right.
But that's always the case. There's always people moving in and out of our town. There's always construction, and the idea that we're ever going to be able to kind of freeze everything and stop and say we can't deal with this. Like you mentioned earlier, we're a pretty smart community. My assumption is everyone I interact with here is brilliant in some way. And I have to believe that as a community, we'll figure out a way to make this work. 1,000 units, in general, across the board, you get 0.68 kids for every unit that we add for a condo. That's generally what we see for apartments and condos. So 1,100 units with 6,800, with 0.68, that's 700. And that's actually probably a high estimate because a lot of the units are going to be studios and 1-bedrooms. At least that's the plan right now.
K through 12, not all.
And that, well, pre-K through 12.
Pre-K through 12, yeah.
So you're really looking at like 15 grades, 700 students. That's about 40, 50 kids a grade. We can absorb that, even at the high school. Right now, if you were to say, we're going to suddenly add next year an extra 100 kids, we probably could find a way to absorb it. It would be really tight, but we'd be able to do it.
Good. Well, I appreciate the conversation. We're out of time, but you obviously have the energy, the enthusiasm, the knowledge, the passion to do it, and I'm looking forward to getting to know you better, particularly as you start your service on the school committee.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
It must be nicer going to into an election cycle knowing that at the end of the day you'll be okay, you know. That's always a good thing, but, you know, I tell everybody else that's running, you know, running in a campaign is good because it really makes you stop and think about what it is you're doing, why you're doing it, and makes you reflect on the community. So campaigns are a good thing. So.
Plus, it gives me the opportunity to meet so many different people and hear their concerns and their issues. Because there are certainly things I've never even thought of that I've had parents say to me, oh, you should, this is something you need to think about. And I say, you're right, it is. I should make sure that's something I think about when I'm on school committee.
I tip my hat to you because you're out campaigning, even though you don't have to, which is, you know, which is good. You know, you gave us a statement in the Lexington Times. You're here to make your statement. It's important to you, and I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much.
Let everybody know how they can learn more about you.
You can go to my website, sarah4lex.com. That's SARAH, the number 4, lex.com, and you can find out more about me there.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I wish you all the best.
Thanks.